Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1139th New Social Environment. I'm Chloe Stagaman, Director of Programs here at the Rail, and I have the extreme joy of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Chase Hall and Eugenie Tsai. And now I'll introduce today's guest and host. Artist Chase Hall documents the ever-shifting lines between personal and generational narratives. Often rooted in autobiographical experience, his explorations of overarching systems of power result in works with both expansive historical sweep and intimate of-the-moment connection. Hall was the subject of a 2023 solo exhibition at the SCAD Museum of Art, and his work is in the permanent collections of institutions including LACMA, the Dallas Museum of Art, and the Whitney Museum of American Art, among many others. Hall lives and works in New York. And our host today, Eugenie Tsai, is a curator writer based in New York. For 16 years, she was the John and Barbara Vogelstein Senior Curator of Contemporary Art at the Brooklyn Museum. During those years, she shaped the contemporary collection and organized around 40 loan and collection exhibitions. Of those, Oscar Ye Ho, East of Sun, West of Moon, and Kehinde Wiley, The New Republic. We are lucky to have Eugenie as a contributor to the Brooklyn Rail and as the host for today's conversation. And with that, I am going to pass it over to Eugenie to get us started.
Thank you, Chloe, for that nice introduction. And hey, Chase in California. I'm excited to be in conversation with you on the occasion of your current exhibition at David Kordansky Gallery in Los Angeles. I only wish I could see the show. A lot has happened in your life since we met. I think it was about 3 years ago. You gave me a walkthrough of Alexander, your first gallery exhibition in New York. And I remember thinking how very thoughtful and articulate you were as we walked through the galleries. I was really impressed by the deliberateness of your decisions, especially your decision to use coffee as pigment and cotton as a support. Two materials, you told me, that reference enslaved labor in the United States. Since we met, a lot has happened in your life, in your professional life, including a museum exhibition, the one at SCAD that Chloe mentioned, a commission for the Metropolitan Opera in New York, various residencies, and of course, the major profile of you in the New York Times to coincide with your show in LA. It was really exciting to get the paper in print and see it so large. Also, your personal life has been very full in the best possible way. So this is an amazing moment for you, and you must feel elated, proud. What do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like it's kind of like the quote. It reminds me of the kind of idea of like working in the dark to shine in the light. I think it's as an artist, I work all the time, and it's helped me see my family different and my own experience different and my work different. And it's always this kind of catalytic charging kind of nest in a way. The studio as this kind of call and response. Life is happening and things are changing and the world is, frankly, kind of crumbling in a way all around us. And it just feels like to get closer to myself, the kind of nexus as my studio, and just try and be the change and be the love and be the light that I can be to my family or to my work. I still feel like I'm a 16-year-old intern who's figuring it out, and I don't really trip on too much of the accolades. And I think just trying to stay steadfast in my work and in my belief system and critique and question is really what charges me. I think now having a child 5 months ago, that was really the first time where I was like, oh, wow, that younger self that you're looking out for and that kind of 16-year-old intern mind state idea. It's a bit of a Shiloh moment. It's like, go on now, get like, I love you, but like, I gotta grow up and I gotta be so it's bittersweet. I think that there's moments through the growth that I really love, and there are moments that are hyper visible and hyper accelerated, and if anything, kind of examine my fissures and fractures in a more serious way. And I think life prepared me for moments in my life. And this is kind of a byproduct of understanding that through hard work and commitment to my craft and practicing my practice, to quote Simone Forti, are all these ways to kind of remain cognizant in what I'm doing and what I care about. So I really appreciate both you and Chloe sharing the kind words about my growth. And, I look at this show coming from Los Angeles before I moved to New York. This is a bit of a manifestation for me. I had seen many shows in Dave's gallery, and I had, the hope that one day I'd have my own exhibition. So to have this show kind of culminate at the time of being in love with my wife, being married, having a child, having my first home and studio. It really is a total dream come true. And I think paintings have always been a receipt of your personal growth as an artist. And when I look at these paintings, they feel like many different pieces of me and who I've become over my 31 years. And the stories or the moments and elements of the human condition that allow us to kind of keep on keeping on. So I'm so happy to be here today. I've been a long fan of the rail, and Fong, everything you do has really brought artists together and created a platform for criticality. And Eugenie, I remember our walkthrough so vividly as well. And it's just, a complete honor to be in conversation with you. So thank you. And I'm excited for the conversation. And yeah, it's a total dream. And I'm so thankful for the studio and painting because it's made helped me make sense of the rest of the things in my life, and attempts to for in the rest of the world as well. So yeah,
It's a beautiful moment.
thank you.
Well, I was really intrigued by the title of your exhibition at Kordansky, Halfrican, a play on half African. And I remember when we met initially and did our walkthrough, you mentioned very specifically being biracial. Um, and I found that really intriguing because being biracial or multiracial is fairly common, but it's rarely discussed. Usually people who are biracial tend to identify with one race or the other, which I've always found a little bit interesting. So your kind of openness and your acknowledgement surprised me and intrigued me. And so when I saw the title of the show, I was wondering if there was anything about this moment that made you decide that this was really the right moment to kind of raise kind of public awareness of the issue, or so I'm just wondering if you can talk about that, uh,
Yeah.
and kind of what your hopes are for doing this.
Yeah, I think, initially it was in reference to my old AOL Instant Messenger screen name. It was Halfrican 22, and I made it when I was probably in fifth grade. And I always was aware of this kind of hybridity between black and white. And I always was, trying to figure out a way to articulate some of the nuances in that kind of in-between space. There have been multiple moments in my life that it became very omnipresent, that kind of absolute identity wasn't possible. So instead of kind of hoping it was never brought up, I wanted to kind of like dive straight into it. So it started as an old kind of reference to my AIM account. And then it started to kind of show its face through different experiences. I was born in Minnesota. I moved throughout Minnesota, Chicago, Las Vegas, Colorado, Los Angeles, Dubai, New York, and I've been in New York for 10 years. So the first 20 years of my life, I moved a lot, every few years. And I was always aware of either being the whitewashed black kid or the tokenized black kid. And when I would go home to a single white mother, it was never like, hey, white mom. And she's like, hey, black son. Like it was just mom and son. So I found this kind of relationship to society's expectations at a really young age. And I think that forced me to be this kind of analytical, kind of survivalist, nomadic person that I was always kind of picking up game and information and analyzing and critiquing. And I think, I had done Skowhegan, the residency in 2019, and I was deep in conversation throughout that summer with Sandra Perry, who was one of the teachers.
Mm-hmm.
And, in the early parts of my experience there, Sandra was, kind of quite frankly, like, you're so interested in Black history and American history, but you're half white. And where is that in the work? And it kind of hit me like a ton of bricks. And I was kind of like, yeah, dang, I'll never be as black as my dad or Kerry James Marshall or Henry Taylor or these figures that meant so much to me in this kind of representation of blackness that it kind of was like, oh yeah, I know some things about, being as close as you can without being an absolute on both sides in this kind of spectrum or kind of conduit to see both ends was kind of more of a responsibility. And it interested me more to think about Barack Obama being half white and half black, but being the black president, or Malcolm X's mother being white or mixed. And this kind of negotiation of realizing that the three-fifths a man idea, thinking about American history or whiteness as an absolute, these things are so obviously present. So it's like if you're not 100% white, you're black, but blackness isn't a monolith. So when I was around black people, it was obvious that I was the light-skinned, high yellow brother type of situation. So I believe that almost your barcode or the cauldron of self or that kind of individuality. We all have our experiences that teach us something. And I found that if I could look at my younger self and help articulate some of the interests I have and questions I have, it would show up in my practice. So a lot of the truth telling and that kind of shame and humility, those are the representations of creativity that we see in many inspirations that we all share colloquially. So it's, from Jay-Z's 444 album to even the way Kendrick speaks about relationships with his aunt or girlfriend. And, these things that people always say, like, hey, button up and don't let everyone know what worries you. But in turn, when you actually liberate yourself and you speak truth and you aren't living behind that kind of shaky facade, you find a lot of people have those concerns and questions as well. So I felt like, to quote Dr. Seuss, it's like no one's youer than you. And what do I know in my experience in these places, from fishing on the Boundary Waters with my white grandpa to being in North St. Paul with my black grandpa and thinking about Black War veterans in relationship to a blue collar kind of whiteness, Minnesota nice. So for me, I was always kind of aware that there was this space in between. And outside of Adrian Piper, I had never really artists discussing it. So after seeing her show at MoMA at the same time of Kerry James Marshall's Mastery, this was like a very kind of potent moment. At the same time, I was getting really interested in abstraction. So thinking about Clifford Still and Jackson Pollock and this idea of genius kind of throwing paint or leaving the cotton canvas exposed. So it was this kind of triangulation of self, conceptual, and painterly canon. And what does it look like to actually go into a cave with a torch instead of follow people in protest? So this metaphor, as I wanted to make space for what it is to be me and not hope that no one kind of pulls off my cloak in this kind of inauthentic experience, trying to narrate a life that wasn't completely lived in its totality. So in this idea of mixedness or breaking things down, I think about the Maillard theory and like the browning of butter, and then you have the kind of mirepoix of onions, carrots, and celery, and all of a sudden they start to cook and simmer, and there's flavor in that. There's a different relationship to cooking in that, and as things come together, we actually can go further. So I think about my work and some of the humility and shame that I work through, juxtaposed to this truth, the human condition and hero's journey, and this kind of clash and that tension. And I think about that in the coffee as black, a seed from Africa being exploited and demanded the most of, and staining whiteness in this cotton American history that is a representation of everything from our shirts, socks, jeans, and how this kind of ubiquitous screech of material was always kind of stopping me in my tracks. So I would start paintings and see the cotton canvas, or I would see a white T-shirt and think about its relationship to history. And I think it was a kind of catch-all in the studio that allowed me to kind of almost draw lines like a detective and see, oh, this is a representation of that. And oh, this reminds me of when I was 12 years old and that person said that. And oh, this is that feeling I have where I'm around my white family or my black family. So it was an opportunity to really harvest a truth as I find this kind of hybridity is only becoming more and more common. I wanted to make sure that the non-monolithic Black experience is being articulated, and it's not just dancing and rapping and playing sports. but it's just everything everyone else does, and we have a right to kind of be in those spaces as well. So it was like a seeing to believe, but also like checking out and kind of grieving and healing of a younger self that was kind of walking around with thorns and needles in my side. And instead, I pulled them out and I wanted to look at it more closely. So it started to think about how does racism come to fruition was like an early question I had in my life way before art. And as I started to build a lexicon and understand the potential and frankly, the catharsis of speaking your truth, I've just become more engaged with trying to articulate the spaces that are less talked about in terms of our history and in our personal identity as well.
Wow. Okay. So hopefully this is going to lead to more nuanced discussions of race or categories, racial identities, or maybe question the relevance of categories, those categories altogether. Um, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's these kind of brackets that we put people in. It's like, oh, he's self-taught. Oh, he's a painter. Oh, he's black. He's a Democrat. He's a Republican. It's just like, for me, there is a necessity to let things commingle and let things have conversation and let there be dialogue. And if we can bracket everything constantly, all it does is allow you to point the finger away from you. And instead, I see myself in many different people. I see my family in many different people. These archetypes that I examine in my work are representations of real life memories and real life experiences that I've had with other living people. So once we self-liberate and we break down the gates and we break down the brackets, what are you left with? And I'm interested in that kind of meat and potatoes, that kind of common denominator that we share instead of the difference that allows us to act like we're not in this kind of fight for a better world together. So I don't know if my goal is necessarily obliterating identity, but it is definitely helping to find a common ground throughout many different people. And through speaking your truth, ideally it can enact truth tellers other places as well. So it's a kind of like an understanding of yourself and showing up in a way through your work that could help have tougher conversations than the ones that are happening so flippantly in the media and in these kind of augmented algorithmic ideas of like your community and your echo chamber, when in reality, multiple people don't, or many people don't have multiple race friends and don't show up in these communities that aren't where they live. And painting has always been this kind of opportunity to take the outside world and wring it out. And this is what I'm left with in that safe space I've created for my creative thoughts.
Thanks. I was going to ask you about St. Paul, but I think you may have answered that question. I remember distinctly that you grew up in St. Paul because I grew up in Minneapolis, which is the city next door, the Twin Cities. And, you know, I was always curious about how people of color experience the Twin Cities. I mean, I'm American born Chinese. My parents were immigrants. And you mentioned Minnesota Nice, which is something that is characteristic of the upper Midwest, where people behave in a really polite and courteous way, but you always kind of wonder what they're thinking beneath the surface. And I certainly always grew up feeling like an outsider, like I was the perpetual foreigner. That was a long time ago. And I know the population at that time was largely Scandinavian. It's certainly changed since then. But I also know that it wasn't so terribly long ago that two Black men, George Floyd and Philando Castile, were killed by the police or members of the police department. So I don't know how long you were in St. Paul. Do you have any experiences of being there? And then you mentioned that shortly after that you've lived in so many places. So I'm just kind of curious about how
Yeah,
long you were in St. Paul, what it was like.
yeah.
Yeah.
My grandma and grandpa have kind of lived between either Omaha, Nebraska or St.
Hmm.
Paul. I was born in St. Paul. And, you know, I think from my experiences in Minnesota, it was always this kind of coming home. Every few years, I'd come visit my grandma or my dad or my other grandma and grandpa. And whether it was in St. Paul or all the way on Lake Superior in Ely in a fishing cabin looking for walleye, I was still being kind of navigated as the only, my friend and mentor in a way, Salema Masekela talks a lot about this idea of being an only, whether you're the only one in your class or the only one in your school or I was the first proof of interracial love in my family. So being both, there was this kind of magnetism where my white grandma who worked in the church for 30 years in a white neighborhood was going to North St. Paul and Frogtown and with the Black community and how those things came together and open conversation is a similar feeling to what I hope I'm doing in my work. I think Minnesota nice and that kind of, almost like suburban wave as you go by. I think every state has that kind of facade where like everything's perfect over here, happy parent of a student from XYZ high school, like this kind of hope that you are proof of the American dream, that your home is a safe space, that your family loves each other, and these very kind of idyllic, bucolic, even like hallmark realities that we all try and showcase are actually so fragile, and everyone has their own battles that they're fighting that I find even in these representations of perfection, or Minnesota Nice, there was obviously the other side, which is people that need help, need support, and need opportunity. So it was this oscillation once again of like these two things kind of clashing. I think Minnesota, in relationship to Blackness, everyone brings up Prince. Everyone thinks about Randy Moss. Everyone has, a deep relationship to Minnesota in the creative space, and Bob Dylan also from Minnesota.
Mhm.
I think it is this Midwest epicenter that is almost equidistant from Los Angeles and New York, which also holds so much creative space that it has this kind of migratory middle. I mean, of course, Chicago, but
Yeah.
Minnesota biased. There is a kind of relationship to so many different people. After the Great Migration, my family had left from Mississippi and Arkansas to Omaha to Minnesota and stopped there. Other families kept going. And I think this kind of American landscape and this reality that there are these kind of invisible borders that separate us, while instead there are these kind of internal townships or counties that hold so much. So thinking about Hennepin, I mean, I have family that has been in the carceral systems there. So when I was, you know, put on to a lot of the information I was reading around George Floyd and these kind of freedom funds and who was allowed to get money out of, the college protester instead of the person who couldn't afford the parking ticket, and how they weren't allowed to have access to the thing that the kid who's a student could have gotten himself out for. So it's like there's this deep kind of sickness across America that we're all becoming more and more privy to. And I think Minnesota is a hotspot because it has so many different types of people. And before we find some sort of balming of our differences, we actually point out the polarizing opposites. So I find that there's a kind of, I was going to say soda, but thinking about Minnesota, I'll call it pop. When you when you
Exactly.
shake up the pop can, there's a tension, there's a pressure. And I think that that pressure shows itself in so many ways. You have creative outlets, you have sport outlets, you have disputes in the streets, and you have the relationship to leisure and 10,000 lakes. And then, as a big Laker fan, I also have a relationship to when the Lakers were in Minnesota and the title, the Lakers. So it kind of is a bunch of different touch points that I almost like run around like a Dexter's laboratory idea where like I click buttons over here and it does something and I'm like, oh yeah, pull on some strings over here. And through that kind of commitment to creativity and thinking and critique, there's this potential to find something new in that. And I feel like Minnesota as this nest for me as I move so many places, but always returned to. It feels like home
Mhm.
because my grandmas both lived there, and my father and my little brother grew up out there. So it's a part of me, but I've really only lived there a few years, so I'm not a complete local in that sense. But I do think a lot about it, and it is a kind of a stamp on who I am and something I think about a lot. And I'm glad we share that the Twin Cities together.
In cities, yeah. Um, you're such an accomplished painter that it's really hard for me to believe that you have no formal art training or at, so I'm kind of curious about how you taught yourself to make paintings. And you mentioned an important experience of seeing a work by Henry Taylor at MoMA. And I'm also, I know you went to Skowhegan, you mentioned Skowhegan and Sandra Perry, and, it's a really prestigious program. It only accepts a fraction of the applicants, around 60 students who spend 9 weeks in the middle of Maine making art and communing with nature. So your application clearly showed great promise. In addition to Sandra, were there any teachers or students who were important to your artistic development? And again, I think you were also a photographer at some point. And so I'm wondering how you learned photography and if your experience as a photographer has influenced your painting practice at all.
Yeah, I think I was really interested in how photography was a tool to articulate myself and my intentions with someone else. So whether it was the way they looked or our eye contact or how they dressed or wow, the street corner or the light coming and creating a shadow on the cement. Like I was just a only child that was very curious and I got a camera at a young age and that allowed me to say like, hey, look, hey, I can go do my thing and say, hey, look at this. So it was this kind of concept or proof, if you will, and it allowed me to start understanding composition, subjectivity, storytelling. I was always drawn to cartoons, and I had grown up loving movies, and photography just felt like a armature, or like an extension of my creative eye. And as I would walk around making images, I would also find objects. It brought me closer to assemblage. It showed me paintings because I would go to the museums and the galleries. It would allow me to have deep conversations and sit with a random person for hours discussing life. And it was always this kind of compass. I would never try and walk the same routes when I moved to New York. And I moved to New York specifically to make images for New York Times and become a photojournalist. And
Oh.
through that journey, I found art by going to these different places and really engaging and being, yeah, kind of overcome with emotion as I was never kind of seeing art outside of the Mona Lisa or Renaissance paintings in textbooks. I didn't understand that the artistic expression really was a part of who that person was. It wasn't so much about perfection or representation. So I think photography was a kind of magnet towards the art, and it's still something I do every day. I never leave the house without my camera. I I became less interested in sharing my images because they become more personal as a kind of a diary in a way, things I see
Mhm.
and things I think about. Um,
Did you
but yeah,
focus on people, Chase? Or were you photographing buildings or just
all the above,
all?
mostly people. At this time, I was 20 when I moved there, and I was dealing with a lot of stuff at home, and I grew up without kind of closeness to my family. So a lot of these representations of like Black male figures that I still think about in my work was thinking about the kind of longing for brotherhood, longing for fatherhood, this kind of Black masculine figure that wasn't just embodied by rage and anger but was actually embodied by history and style and leisure and sport and criticality and this kind of imagination and the ancestral reality that all of that is in me. And what does it look like? So it was this mirroring of self, but without the context of standing with someone and sharing every image, it kind of got lost. And that kind of exploitation really made me think differently about photography and who makes images and who takes
Mhm,
images,
mhm, mhm.
and how can I craft a story around my deeper self instead of trying to find it in other people. So I think it was always this kind of I want to say catch and release, but more like an accordion. There's this expansive moment where you absorb everything and then you kind of compress it, and it's like what does that experience of going out in the world and finding what the most important part was to me, and then going back out in the world and this kind of cadence or frequency that allowed the camera to kind of get me out of my own way, but then allow the nest or kind of home studio as a place to kind of articulate some of that. But it really was just a love of people being outside, walking. And I'd make every images of everything from people and birds, fountains, corner stores, the beach, Coney Island. Like it was just like, all right, I'm up today. And I was working as a line cook in Lower Manhattan. And if I wasn't cooking, I was making photos. And if I needed a break, I was either getting coffee or looking at art. So it was this kind of like cyclical obsession that I'm still lost in, and still drives me. But it was always like a calling will keep calling you idea. I was drawn to the camera. I was drawn to speaking with people. I was drawn to the museums. I was drawn to art spaces. I was drawn to styles and representations of how we show up in the world. And I knew through my own experiences that there was a sense of catalytic return. There was a way where when you meet someone and they inspire you to get out of bed the next day, or you're so excited to get up because you want to go see something. Like these were just like deep, passionate moments in my early adulthood that still kind of drive me every day. So that kind of intuition as a muscle, creativity as a necessity, just getting closer to this kind of daily practice of thinking. I don't put on my artist hat and take it off. It's something I believe in and think about and look around and close look at everything all the time. And it was more about like, how does this medium help share that story? So for me, still working in photography and sculpture and assemblage and trying to write more and trying to archive more and still make paintings. It's just like a deep commitment to help articulate what I think about. And I believe different mediums and different ways to share it are through these different tools and points of expression.
Yes, but at some point you decided to take that leap into painting. And when you applied to Skowhegan, were you working as a photographer for the Times, or where does Skowhegan figure in your life? And what was it about the draw of painting that was so powerful? Even because all of the things you mentioned, the things that you photograph, are things that also show up in your painting. So like,
Yeah.
what was the necessity? I mean, why did you feel the urge? It seemed like something rather urgent to become a painter, to express yourself in a different medium or an additional medium.
Yeah, I think like, sadly, photography relies on film photography more so relies on natural light. The sun went down and I was still worrying and thinking and considering the conversation I just had with someone or the multiple artworks I saw that day. So painting became a like this hairball of everything I cared about for that day. And I only had the time to do it after working and after being outside. So I didn't want that kind of creative outlet to ever stop. So I got closer to drawing and cartooning when I was younger. And then through going to multiple museums and galleries, I had started to see art that didn't look like the Mona Lisa or Titian or these perfection kind of Renaissance. Because it was like, it's now. I saw David Hammond's. I saw Benny Andrews. I had thought about Lynette Ediambokke's work. I had seen Alma Thomas. These were moments that allowed me to understand it wasn't about like paint me like one of your French girls. That wasn't, I didn't need the palette and paint all over me to be an artist. And I didn't need to go to school to go make paintings. So it was a mix of being so kind of moved by engaging with art. But at the time, I also met my girlfriend at the time, Lauren, who was studying painting and sculpture at Parsons. So I would go into classes with her and I'd walk into the art school for the first time and be like, 80 of you all just sit here and like make art and have critical conversation and like you're gonna get a degree for this. It just didn't make sense to me. And at that same time, I was seeing Pollock, Frankenthaler, Lee Krasner still and being like, this is genius. Like I don't get it. That's the classic like my 5-year-old can make the painting. So at a time when I had no background, I didn't understand why this was genius. I didn't understand how art schools work, but I had a deep negotiation with life and history in my own experience, and I was obsessed with that deep emotionality that you can find through Tribe Called Quest. You can find through B.B. King, Van Morrison, looking at watching Trading Day, understanding the Boondocks, like all of these critical cataclytic, I don't know if I'm saying that right, moments in my life that brought me closer to a feeling. I was like, how can I do that? And I couldn't make movies. I didn't have a musical background, but I was always drawn to cartoons and photography. So as I got closer to personification and storytelling and American history and these kind of conceptual notions, I started to see like, oh, there's so many ways to talk about the thing you care about. And if you truthfully care about it, maybe someone will listen. I had worked for Greer Patterson at the time. I had worked for Adam McEwen. I had studied at the Mountain School of Arts under Piero Golia in LA before Skowhegan. I had done the ACA in New Smyrna Beach under Catherine Opie before Skowhegan. I was really obsessed with the idea that there were alternative ways to become an artist. And I applied to Yale. I applied to these. I didn't get in. So it was like the by any means necessary commitment to waking up every day and working towards something. I probably have a sense of PTSD and survivalism and this kind of necessity to not go back to how it was. And I think a lot of people in the art world have the opportunity to, give up on the days that it's tough and not inspiring and less engaging. So for me, I find that some of the things that I thought defined me for the worst actually prepared me to be my best and actually pushed me further than someone that might not have had to kind of turn that coal into a diamond through the pressure systems at play. And I think from carceral systems to sitting in court to losing homes and the travesties that many people deal with, being in the art world was like seeing color for the first time. It was like listening to rap music for the first time. It was like watching Forrest Gump. I had never been so moved by something that was sitting kind of right below my nose. So I just became a kind of obsessive Virgo analytical person where every artist that made me feel a way, I would look at their CV. Where did they show? What galleries? What museums collect their works? Who are these curators? Where did they go to school? What do they read? What are their books? How do I get the Spark Notes and the PDF? And how do I listen to it's like I always tell myself, use the internet for good. You can look up anything. There's endless resources. You can go to a library, you can read. So as we combat this kind of social media takeover and this obsession with material, the self-liberation I found was go into the stacks, go into the archive, go navigate American history in these estate sales and in these thrift shops and in these places where there is proof of the white imagination. That dehumanizing blackface and tchotchkes and the tea towels and the Aunt Jemima, all these things were like proof of a white imagination. I think that's an important moment for me. And the whiteness and the blackness genetically exist within me. So I'm riddling with these moments of rage and horror and embarrassment. And I'm also thinking about doubled consciousness of W.E.B. Du Bois, reading Marcus Garvey, reading Bell Hooks, thinking about these writers like Stuart Hall and the way that I was having to combat with a genetic shame, this kind of whiteness as acne that will always hinder who I am in relationship to blackness, but also finding that there was so much effort and so much scholarly academic rigor in explaining blackness outside of baggy clothes and running into each other and fighting each other. So for me, I found this like web from other artists, from other residencies, from critique for the first time, from real community for the first time. I had never shared my creative goals because it wasn't something that I had a community to talk to about. And then I went to a residency for the first time. And it's like, oh, you like the color purple? Like, what do you like about it? Why do you like, do you know how to make it? What does it look like from the other? So what happens if like you find, the birds of a feather and all of a sudden you're spending the night talking about the color purple and not in relationship to the play or the movie, but actually like finding your people. So I found by working for artists and going where artists were, you start to kind of have a relationship with one another. And I just kept showing up. I kept doing the work when I wasn't there. And it's something that gave my life purpose and value. I'm obsessed with reading and information and looking things up. And then the kind of proof nowadays is like, what do you do? How does it look? How do you share with people what you care about? And I didn't want to just have to kind of put on the suit and tie to go say it through some legal jargon. I didn't want to have the bureaucracy and red tape to say it through fighting for people in real estate, right? I didn't. So painting was this immediate, like coffee, cotton, color, people, life story, truth, like all of that congealed in the paint. And then that aura and that spirit, I believe, is why paintings are so effective when you see them by any of the artists when they really kind of hit you like that. It's because there's an unconditional giving, and then the painting is that receipt of that truth that's kind of coming out of you. So it's this kind of cauldron work, a root network work, making sense of a younger self, looking out for other people that do find potential questions or agitations in your work. So it was like trying to reiterate what creativity has shown me in other ways. It's like I grew up watching reruns of Richard Pryor. So I knew that something was off at a young age. I had watched Chappelle's show. I was obsessed with Tribe Called Quest. I listened to Tupac from when I was 3 years old to my ride here. So it was just that I knew something was up from a young age, and these mediums were just like, how can I talk about it? Because pointing the finger and saying everyone is wrong isn't a way to make everything right. You have to do the work. You have to find a way to build language, to find critical points, to make a more bright future. And I believe in that, and that's what the practice and my studio is for me. Is like it's my conduit to work towards something I believe in. And I didn't want to ever lose that space, or let it be hindered by some of the hyper acceleration or visibility we spoke about in the beginning. It's just like there's almost like a bayonet on the heart and the spirit. It's like this is a world, and we all have to play our part, and we all have roles, and we all have to keep the lights on, but never lose who you are and why you love what you do. And that kind of dissonance is incredibly important to me and what I care about and think about in my work.
Um, in your first show, there were a lot of paintings that had aquatic themes. I'm really interested in the subjects you paint. I think it's clear from your comments that maybe it's the materiality, the visceral aspects of the painting as opposed to photography that really kind of reach people in a different way. And I'm also intrigued by your themes, which I know in your first show, I was struck by the aquatic theme. A lot of fishermen, fish, lobsters. I'm wondering now if it has any relationship to the boundary waters. In the show I saw at David Kordansky in New York, the bathers, suddenly we're at the beach. There are a lot of surfers, a lot of tropical scenes. And in this show, your current show, you have a number of there are always sports ranging from equestrian, to football. There are often then portraits of men in overalls or denim, or, fishing outfits, leather aprons, who are clearly workers. You seem very interested in bridging classes and introducing different people from the money class, the working class side by side in an almost utopian situation. So I'm wondering about your choice of themes and if they're based on your own experience. You mentioned archives, or do you look at archival photographs? Are they based on media images? Are they based on photographs that you yourself take? I'm also wondering about exhibition making. When you think about making a show like your show currently on view, do you really think about creating an entire experience for the visitor, or do you make the individual works and then think about how to put them together later? Sorry, these are two questions.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
But okay.
Yeah, I think for me, the aquatic and the bathers and this kind of leisure idea was thinking about who has access to the water, who can look at the horizon and well up with tears and think about how special life is, and who gets to surf from a wave that's sent from a tide from the other side of the world. Like, not everyone. And frankly, mostly just the upper class. So it was this kind of negotiation of when I had moved to the West Coast from the Midwest and was very kind of omnipresent that, Black people don't surf and do you get sunburnt and like your hair doesn't get wet? Like you're gonna, hey, and it was these kind of like, back to the younger self thorn idea. It's like I didn't have the language to stand up for myself necessarily in the best place that I could have in the moment, but through this kind of correction and American historical history that exists outside of the narratives that are pushed by agencies of power. Like there were plenty of Black surfers, there's plenty of Black horseback riders, there's plenty of people coming together and building something and posing for it, and being proud of graduating in school, to be proud of working and on the shop with your grandpa and wearing your workwear clothes. And, I think all of these different themes and symbols are archetypes of me, things I care about, places I believe are really important to find yourself and have the kind of growth points that allow you to show up better for your family, for your friends, for your loved ones. Um, there was many times where, people played water polo or was a lifeguard, or when I would always kind of be like, what the, like, you're a lifeguard, you're 14. Like, how are you swim? It was just like, these are my questions. And through working and meditating on the subject, I see parts of myself, I see parts of my friends, I see parts of my family. And, I think the water was this negotiation of a place that I found so much that had nothing to do with American history. It had nothing to do with the past lives of people that have been oppressed. It had nothing to do. It was just like, wow, I have no clock, I have no technology. I'm out on the water, whether I'm fishing, surfing, wake skating. Like I just loved that this kind of took me out of the world that I spent so much time with before. And I think this show, Halfrican, was thinking about a truth. I wanted it to be everything about my experience so far and speaking truth for the first time. I had lived a lie protecting my mom in her kind of various ways. She made money and moved around. And now being a father and having a kid, I didn't want to fib to her. I didn't want to make up these narratives that people believe my mom was a horse trainer or that I believe it's just like I've said everything under the sun to make sure that no one found out what was really going on. And I couldn't bear to lie to my child. And then me try and speak truth to her behind closed doors, but she's like, whoa, you just like didn't say that to that person you just met though. Like that really upset me under the process of starting my own family, living under my own roof. I wanted to be as truthful as I am to my daughter, as I am to my work, as I am to other people. And I didn't want to live with that kind of glitchy rage, like, you know, um, kind of pretend thing anymore. So this show was a piece of, the workwear and the kind of upstate realities where I am now, and working with, fishing and gear and the wood grain and the idea of building and construction. And then you have the Santa Monica, Malibu and the beach and the lifeguard and the ocean. And I have the sports from Las Vegas and Colorado where I thought I would be in the NFL or play basketball. And, all of these subjects are me, but it's not autobiographical.
Mm-hmm.
They're more than me because everyone knows these people that show up in their life and help them become a better person. So it's almost like a way for me to, thinking about the photograph, literally take the composition and imagine it as a viewfinder. Who is this? Where does the light hit? Where is the darkness in the image? Where's the story you're telling? And, I mean, even this image of my wife and my daughter, this was the first time that it wasn't an archetypal person, it's a literal person. And keeping this painting in our house, I wanted her to grow up and think about the process of her becoming a human, from the bees and the birds next to her to the ops hiding in the lions behind in the grass to the snake near her feet, and all of the ways in which we thought deeply about what we were doing in this process of growing our family. And this moment to kind of be a homecoming to me in Los Angeles, where I really spent my adolescent years in high school through so much of that, and being able to look back where this show feels like a totality of my own experience that could hopefully feel like a truth telling for the first time in a way. I wanted all of my states I lived in and all of my loves and all of my concerns and questions to be in this show. And it was this kind of negotiation of the title to what are the subjects to who is it for. I don't think about the viewer or the audience when I'm making paintings. I know they're in it because either the cotton eye line or the nose, the mouth, knuckles, knees, areas that are usually tokenized on the black figure are left white as a relationship to oppositional material. And then I have subjectivity and an experience that's more expansive than what's shared in the news as a way to demand more out of ourselves and our family and others. I think there was a part of the question I forgot, but I definitely feel
Oh,
like,
yeah, I was wondering if you think about, um, you talk about storytelling. So if you think about the exhibition as a story that you're telling, but maybe you're telling it to yourself, or do you think about the audience's experience? I'm beginning to think maybe not.
yeah, I
Um,
think even back to the rap metaphor, movie metaphor, like you listen to um, you're watching something evolve and shed skin and become more truthful through that process. So there's considerations that might inspire someone else to go closer to their truth. But no, I don't really set up parameters of like, all right, I got to do the like barn painting. Like did that. Now I move on to the, it's just like what
Oh,
I,
I'm thinking more of the a visceral experience. I mean, so that sometimes going through an exhibition can be like going to maybe a piece of theater, or where the walking through creates a kind of evokes certain creates elicits certain feelings and experiences on the part of the viewer, so that when you get to the end of the exhibition, you sometimes feel a sense of you know, great satisfaction, catharsis. That I'm just talking about that.
Yeah, I think, for me, a mentor told me it's really hard to be everything at once, meaning like I
Yeah,
can be the
that's for sure.
curator, the painter, the gallerist, the marketer, the friend, the dad. So it's like when I'm in painting mode, it's like jumping, striking, action, sweating. My armpits are sweating. I'm worried. I'm nervous. I'm counter and response and just like blaring my horn as loud as I can. And it's that safety net that I've built to let that trust and that kind of one-to-one expression really exist. I painted this with my hands. Looking on the overall, there's literal handprints. The thumb is painted on the tie. I had mark made, and the fireflies in the background were in relationship to living upstate in late August when the fireflies come out and kind of look like a firework. So for me, every painting is just trying to like capture a deep expression with myself. And I think through the process of making an exhibition, it's kind of a like what's the right way to articulate it? Like it almost is like an album. I always tell myself like
Mhm.
album mode. Like when you're so in it and you have the blinders on and there's nothing else that can get in the way of you and these questions and articulations of a past. And I think of it more as like a track list.
Yeah.
There's different paintings that have a different cadence. There's some that hit really hard and there's some that are more subtle. And you need that kind of ebb and flow and the balance. Looking at how people feel
Oh,
when they
let's
move
stop
through
right
it.
here. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I ended with this for a reason. I didn't want people to
Yeah.
feel exhausted in the beginning of the show. I wanted it to feel like they had learned about the subjectivity and who these people are, and then we kind of come together as one and take that moment to think about the youth, and think about the past in this kind of self dedication to a better tomorrow. So this is a group of, I believe it's 106 or 107 people
It's so
standing.
epic. Yeah, I
Thank you.
want to see this in person.
Yeah,
Um,
it's 24 feet by 6 feet, and it's 100 plus figures standing in front of a public school. So I wanted to kind of have the dichotomy of the burnt sienna bricks with the coffee bricks. I wanted everyone to come together as this cohort and think about us moving through the world into the future. I often think about my classmates or past friends and who they are and where they are now. And like for that moment, we believed like, hey, one of us might be a doctor, one of us might be a lawyer. And like, oh, look, she ended up having a couple kids and he worked at IBM. Like, I love people. I love coming together, and I also love being alone, and I love being critical. So the work between the individual portrait, then the group portrait is this, hey, I go alone to become better when we're together. And I need these individual experiences of deep reckoning with oneself to be present and to make space and to have dialogue with people that might not have had those moments of growth. But in the kind of eureka moment of us all standing together, we can kind of be as one. You know, it's like I think about the lumberjacks cutting down redwood trees back in the day, and they take a photo with the old rusty saw and they're all proud. Or, hey, you and your family caught a marlin in Cabo, and you have a photo that hangs on your dad's office mantle of like the whole family was there and like look at the marlin we caught, you know, at the eighth grade graduation. These moments in our human experience that can be kind of bookmarked as a moment where we came together and we tried our best, juxtaposed to the moments no one knows about where you tried your best and you were alone. So I think this kind of dissonance between coming together as that accordion idea, but then also the compression and the real analytical potential of being alone. But then this relationship of being looked at, you know, that cotton eye
Mhm.
line, the hair, the ways where our self is riddled with this kind of racial mosaic of not being enough, but still standing tall. So these kind of moments of refusal juxtaposed to the kind of impasto, kind of raking, very painterly, chroma filled paint almost falling off of the canvas was a kind of balance that I was interested in having as this kind of push and pull or kind of punch and counter. um, there is a relationship to teaching. I teach at NYU still for only 3 years now, but it's been it really informed me how much it shares with me and how all of these kind of thoughts can't just stay in my brain. They should be in paintings or in conversation or helping people with their own personal kind of hurdles. So I think, you know, that painting was an idea of, you know, I installed the show on election day.
Mhm.
I had made this show thinking about my baby, thinking about the world and its kind of collapse of an empire happening worldwide. And I wanted to believe that the only answer is education. The only answer is the youth and believing in oneself. So it was this kind of, you know, in hindsight, I wish I made it first instead of last. That painting very much put me into a back spasm that put me in bed for more than 7 days. I
The
work alone,
logistics, oh,
and it's
mind-boggling.
like, you
Do
know,
you work flat? Wait, did you make it flat or?
yeah, the coffee is, you know, obviously not an art material, so it wants to run off the canvas immediately. So doing it flat allows me to kind of corral it. I have to do many layers of it, and there's many different tones that I create. I've been able to develop 26 different tones out of a single coffee bean, and it all has to be done incredibly hot. So the painting is done mostly upright, the coffee's done mostly flat. And it's this kind of mad dash of abstraction and response. And I think about it like freestyle rapping or free jazz. You just kind of like see what's going down, and you've got to make sure that it's doing the kind of compositional thing you want, but also screeching out and raging out and speaking and, you know, yelling the whispers aloud. It's like the moments I see faces and pareidolia and ink blot testing and Rorschach testing, these were all moments of like the inner soul speaking without the kind of direct relationship from like what's that word and how do I say it to someone. But in painting, it's like all of, you know, this idea of thinking about painting as a palindrome. I consider a lot. It's like the negative brings you in and the positive brings you out, and it's that kind of um, mirroring or kind of in and out thing that I really believe can hold much more than just like this is this person and this is how I painted it. It's like my whole world exists in these paintings, and now I'm trying to find the language to share it outside of my brain. But no, it really, that painting in relationship to the exhibition really was a great capstone of a that kind of shy low self that I mentioned. It was like I wanted to push myself more than I've ever pushed myself in my work in terms of scale, and through new thresholds come new responsibilities. It's like I think about life in relationship to like a video game. It's like new level, new bosses. I grew up playing World of Warcraft. I would get to a certain level and you'd have to beat the boss and then you'd try again and you'd get something, but you'd also lose something. And this way that, you know, every year is an opportunity for us to show up better for ourselves, our family, our work. And through what you learn that year, ideally that becomes true. So exhibitions as this kind of year-long, 2-year long experiment that then kind of comes together in one place for a month is like breaks my heart, but it's also long enough. You know, this show is already coming down on the 14th and
Yeah.
it closes this week for Thanksgiving. And then it's like, oh wow, like
Yeah, you
back
really
to the
should go
lab,
on the road, right?
back to the lab. So no, it's a lot of things, but I'm just thankful. I think I read this New Yorker cartoon, and it was these people looking at great paintings in the museum, and it was like this is a lot less impressive knowing he had free childcare. So I just want to shout out my wife and my daughter, because none of this would be possible without Lauren holding it down for me to go on my creative journey and be this kind of creative excavator of history that I believe I can do, and be this kind of cultural scientist that can hopefully build language to share with others as a way to mitigate some of our deep existential concerns that we all share. So thank you, Lauren and Henrietta. And I'm so excited to celebrate and rest going into the Thanksgiving time.
Thank you so much, Chase. That was beautiful.
Thank
Um,
you. And thank you guys at Brooklyn Rail as well.
I think I think there is time for questions. Is that I'm looking at Chloe, yes?
Yes, but first of all, I just want to say thank you to both of you so much for this conversation, which has been a pleasure to listen to. Chase, if you are still willing to take a few questions, we have some for you. The first one is from an anonymous audience member who is wondering how you choose your colors and think about color in your work.
Yeah, I think about color in my work as a relationship to getting dressed in the morning. I was the kid who would lay out my clothes before sixth grade, before class, and I'd be like, "Ooh, I'm gonna rock these baby blue socks on the left and the pink socks on the right and the discolored Converse, and like this shirt will let them know." So it's just kind of like, who is this person? How would they dress? What do they eat? What do they like to do? What did their parents do? Where do they live? Like these are just kind of character development questions I think about. And then a term I tell myself a lot is break the printer. This idea that like it shouldn't be sensical, but it shouldn't be illogical. So like that space between decision making, taste making, palette kind of construction, but also trusting who you are. I try and flip myself inside out in my work, and some of the decisions that if I make someone wear a pink suit, well, I'm wearing a gray V-neck sweater. I'm not wearing a pink sweater, but the things I get to kind of project on in a way are. So there's this self-dressing or kind of self-belief system in how I pick a color. But then it's also balanced by the kind of velvety coffee brownness and the kind of shrieking whiteness. So it's a, a relationship to style, and tonal understanding, which is based on life and things you look at and your kind of sound. It's like I think about painting like a frequency. It's like, you might use the whammy bar, someone might not. Someone might sing it like an opera, someone might sing it like a, stream of conscious person that's been untrained. So it's just a kind of sound, and this is what my sound looks like.
Thank you for that answer, Chase, and thank you for that question. That's a great segue to Magley's question. So I'm going to pass it over to Magley.
Hi, Chase. Thank you so much. That was such a wonderful conversation. I really appreciated the way that you talked about your process being kind of like creating an album. So I was wondering if you have like any soundtracks that keep you going in the studio.
Literally this whole talk, all I can hear is Kendrick Lamar's new album in my head, and I'm in Los Angeles. So it's just like, get out my face. Like I just like playing too much because I've listened to it probably 80 times in 2 days. But I think it's a perfect example of how you can put your deepest concerns in the song. It's like to quote Jay-Z, it's like make the song cry. I'm not out here trying to like make the happiest painting where everyone's like satiated and we just kind of continue on. I want to make the things that break you down. The album came out and I looked at my wife. I was like, hold Henny, I'm putting on my headphones and I'm going into the bath and I'm turning off the lights. And I sit there and I'm like, okay, okay. It's like meeting someone at that level of intensity. It's not an easy place to get to, but it's a great reminder of it's possible. So this kind of notion of a bat signal in the sky, I think about a lot. Like there are certain people that really inspire me at your low days. Be like, oh, I know they're working, and you look up there and you're like, all right, they're going for it. And I think that one soundtrack would be tough to articulate, but it's it's things from early days that remind me of my mom to very new things that remind me that like tomorrow is not guaranteed. So give it all you can today. So that kind of compilation of things that move you are similarly to how I think about the exhibition as an album. But I don't know if there's directly one song, but that Kendrick album's definitely got me fired up and excited to go home and paint.
Thank you, Chase.
Min, I think you had a question next, so I'll pass the mic to you.
Hi, thank you both for the conversation. I wanted to ask, it's sort of two questions that are related to one another. I wanted to ask your decision to portray individuals versus a collective, which I think you kind of touched upon towards the end of the talk, but I wanted to hear more about that decision, whether there's a pairing or a large group, and versus an individual being depicted, how you make that decision. Another part of the of your conversation that I really enjoyed was how you were really incorporating all the things that you were reading, learning, taking up. It really felt like you're like a sponge trying to learn and make this into and bring this into your practice. And I wanted to ask if I know you're not thinking about viewers while you're painting, but I was wondering if this kind of learning process continues within the exhibition space, whether that is a consideration, and how that informs your practice.
Yeah, I think to touch on the first part, the individual versus the group, it reminds me of the days you have alone where you have certain kind of moments of like, oh wow, I didn't think about it like that. It's like a road trip. It's like something happens, you get on the road, you're 2+ hours, and all of a sudden, like the sun's setting over the desert and there's a cactus silhouette. Or yesterday I was surfing, me and my best friend Brian, all these dolphins are around us, and the sun setting through a fishing boat through the front window, we see the green flash as it goes somewhere else. So it was like, oh, that negotiation of like the sun through the fishing boat, like word, I didn't put that in a painting yet. So it's like this kind of understanding that like when you live a true life, you have truer feelings. And when you have truer feelings, you have more to express. So I'm really a porous observer of everything from where I live to what I'm interested in. And I think then you can come back and have that smile on your face and an aura and a spirit where your friends in that kind of group moment is like, wow, like I'm glad you've been doing well. And then that inspires them to go, on that road trip or go surf or go play tennis or do the thing that's not just entrenched in, you know, dotting I's and crossing T's. And then the second part of your question was, can you remind me?
Yeah, sure. I wanted to hear more about how you go about installing your work and creating an exhibition, and how all the things that you're reading, learning
All
about
right.
gets translated into a viewer's experience, or whether that is an important part of your practice.
Yeah, I'm not sure yet exactly how to do that. I think something I notice personally is like titling is so important to me. And as you go into a white cube space, usually there's no titles, and I'm with it, right? Like I don't like seeing title and the gallery name and all that like right next to it. But then also now post COVID, where like you're supposed to QR code every experience you have, like no one's really doing that either. So there's a lot of lost space between conversations like this and like you had an art show. That's awesome, man. You're killing it. Let me go see it. And like you miss all of the like nitty gritty kind of like the nerd in you to like really understand what's going on. So I had a great conversation with a friend who came through for a walk through the other day and was really kind of pushing me to be like, hey, like if it needs to be your website, let it be your website. But like everything you're saying, I wish I could share that with someone that goes and sees your show. And like, how can there be these spaces where that kind of quicksand of the image continues to create space instead of it being this kind of like next one, next one, next one experience? So I'm trying to find a way to kind of slow down the engagement with each piece and really try and navigate how there could be more information there. Because I do think at this hyper accelerated world we all share, it's like people barely go see the show in person because they've seen it on Instagram. let alone like spend time with the painting and try and understand some of the nuance outside of like, that's a football player, so it's like that is a hard reality. I think that there are a lot of opaque realities in the art world that keep people away from some of that spirit, for lack of a better word. And I'm working really hard to try and find a way to make sure that I don't um, leave that spirit on the table, but instead help it be kind of a part of the work. So maybe through more online engagement or more book reality and things like that. But yeah, it's hard getting people's attention and sharing the things that you care about. Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Min, and thank you for that answer, Chase. I'm gonna ask the last question today. Um, Chase, you have such a mesmerizing mark making style, and you leave a lot of negative space in these really interesting ways, and the result is a surface that sort of undulates and brims with all of these different patterns. And I'm wondering how you developed that style and what it achieves for you, both in the studio, pace wise as you're making the work, but then also afterwards when you're looking at a composition and shaping it.
Yeah, I often think about the negotiation of style or composition as like a handwriting.
Mhm.
Like this was just how it came off of the brush. And then when I was trying to discuss American history, it felt hard for me to cover up the cotton canvas while I was trying to talk about American history. So I think it initially started out of a like, if Frankenthaler and Pollock are showing the canvas, but just throwing paint down, like what does it look like to think about my artistic canonical genetic history? So I think about Charles White, Kerry James Marshall, Henry Taylor, and I'm thinking about Clifford Still and Frankenthaler and Pollock, and what does that look like? And I believe that there was a tension and a clash and an unlearning and a liberation that wasn't about the performance of finality. I wasn't obsessed with the idea of like it has to be all like let me, it's like no, I was interested in that kind of breath that came out of it. And then that started to introduce other corners of art making and art looking. I think it came from um, trying to navigate that kind of personal history and interest. And then through the mark making, it was like I, because I didn't go to school for it, I think there's a lot of things that kind of get like beaten out of us that maybe I still do. So now it's just trying to figure out the conversation and the language to make sense of some of those bad habits. It's like the coffee is directly in relationship to black and white photography. I think about where does light hit and where doesn't it? If you want to paint this shirt, you're going to do pure black in the crease and you're going to do a natural gray 8 on the top and a natural gray 3 on the wrist. Like it's just light science. But then it's also like knowing that spot metering idea, you can also just like throw a wrench in it whenever you want. So it's about understanding composition and what creates a stunning, striking portrait, but then also how can I hide initials in it or faces in it or leave certain areas untouched to articulate that part of the body. So it really was just like it's like a yo-yo or something. It's like you do it for 10,000 hours, all of a sudden you're like doing weird little goofy nuanced things that like only you do because like you walked around your living room thinking with the yo-yo. So it wasn't super like mapped out, and I never even knew it was a uh an articulation of my style until I heard other people kind of bring that up. So I think, on the naivete of like, this was a painting that I felt talked about the thing I liked. And I just, over the last 12 years of just trying to talk about that, I've gotten closer to articulating it in the image. And that was just through showing up in my studio and trying to keep improving and looking at art and responding and seeing other things in the world and bringing them into the artwork. It's like a beat or the background music and then the lyrics it's like not many people listen to a song a cappella, and there's a reason. So I wanted it to try and have this evolution or mutation as it just like, it's almost like a rubber band ball that keeps building on itself. And I just wanted to keep putting another one over it through these different um, moves. It's like I grew up skateboarding, so the falling and getting back up in your style, keeping your hands down. How do you do a trick that someone else does the same but looks different? Like it just started to be like a way to, yeah, articulate an image and a thought at the same time and just keep doing that.
Thank you so much, Chase, and thank you, Eugenie, for
Thank
this
you.
luminous and really generous dialogue today. And thank you to Alice and the team at David Kordansky, who were so helpful in preparing all of those beautiful images that we looked at throughout today's conversation. Thank you to the Terra Foundation, who sponsor the New Social Environment Program and make weekday conversations like this one possible. They also support our archive, where you'll be able to watch this shortly. The Rail has been free and independent for 24 years. A donation directly supports us. I encourage you to support our work in the chat if you can. And if you're free tomorrow, join us for a screening of Michael Blackwood's 2007 film, Jeff Wall Retrospective. It'll be screening. You can register on our website for a screening link to watch throughout the day tomorrow. And as is rail tradition, you all can now turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so much for joining us today, and take care, everyone.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Eugenie.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Eugenie.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everybody.
JC.
Thanks for
Much.
sharing today.
Thank you, Chase.
Thank you.
Great discussion. Thank you. Have a restful week, everybody.
Good
Thank
job,
you,
Chase.
everybody.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Appreciate
Bye,
it.
everyone. Thank you so
Happy
much. Take
Tuesday.
care.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Bye.
Bye.